called The Man Who Would Eat Anything. He ate glass, lit cigarettes, coins, tin cans, paper cups, and even a raw eel from the nearby fish market. In the early hours, the tourists clogged the narrow street. The man who would eat anything set himself up with a cardboard sign, a folding chair, and a tin bucket. He might start his show, if he was feeling particularly good, by munching glass. Awed and often too disgusted to look away, the tourists threw change into the bucket. Scooping up the change, he tossed the coins in the air, one after the other, catching them in his mouth and swallowing. He massaged his throat for effect. I'll get that one later, he joked. The largest tips came from tourists who dared him to eat things they thought he would refuse. A man pushing a stroller handed him a child's pacifier. Down it went. He coughed and said, "That takes me back." He had staked out his spot in late April. He was there every weekend during the spring. It didn't take long for the local news to come down to check out this phenomenon. A young reporter with a ponytail asked him how he came up with the idea to eat such strange objects. "I never was a picky eater," he grinned. The reporter confessed that she would love to see him eat. Now, glass was always a crowd pleaser, but he knew for this occasion it would have to be something particularly good. It had to be something special. The man who would eat anything leaned forward to the microphone, nipped the soft foam cover with his front teeth, and down it went. The ponytailed reporter squealed with glee. He saw the spot on the evening news. On TV, he looked haggard and crazy-eyed. Although the spring morning had been brisk, the sun had been high overhead. The sun highlighted the silver at his temples, and the lines etched his face. They showed a close-up of his mouth, the slightly inward slant of his thick teeth. His hotel room had a musty smell, and he flipped through the channels, trying to find something else to watch before drifting off to sleep. The reception was frustratingly bad. After an hour, he turned out the light and stared at the ceiling. The heater clicked along the wall, and his stomach growled. Despite his best efforts, the man that would eat anything could not fall asleep. It was Saturday evening, and he usually slept soundly after a day working with tourists. He thought about the ponytailed reporter. He thought about her squeal of glee as he ate the foam off the microphone. The foam had squished readily in his mouth. The next day, the crowd was larger than he was used to. The crowd grew exponentially. People edged close to him with cameras and cell phones. Fathers held children on their shoulders. He began to think that he had finally found a place to settle down. But just as it had been in Portland and San Francisco, the shtick got old. He began to grow tired of the same surroundings. The weather would be turning cold soon, and that was usually the time he would buy a bus ticket and head south. Like a bird, he would return when the weather started to lighten and the days began to get longer. Like a bird, he would migrate. Yeah, I knew you were all strange people. The second one is called The Box That She Would Fit Into. The box that she fit into was getting smaller and smaller. This was not a question of walls closing in, but a matter of taking up less space. It started with a dog crate when the contortionist was 7 years old. On her hands and knees, she backed into the crate and closed the metal door. After 20 minutes, her feet prickled with pins and needles. After 30 minutes, her parents returned from the grocery store. In college, it had become, at first, a way of escaping from the world, and then her flexibility made her popular at parties and even more popular with the boys she dated. After class, she would go for a long run, stretch, and eat a salad without dressing. Each added pound was space that she could not afford to take up. She took up less and less space for longer and longer periods of time. Her college boyfriend joked that when she died, they'd be able to bury her in a matchbox. When she finished college, she married a carpenter who liked to make boxes for her. Each box fit inside the other. She was like a matryoshka doll. She was the prize inside the smallest box. The boxes filled the garage until they could no longer park their cars inside of it. She began to sleep inside of the boxes. Naturally, this began to strain her relationship with the carpenter, who had given up his dream of having children. The contortionist, you see, had enough trouble shrinking herself, and a baby would only make her larger. Besides, she would be jealous that inside of her would be a smaller creature, a creature that had won. Eventually, she could enter a room and shrink out of sight. She was a ghost of a memory, even when she was right in front of the carpenter's eyes. After a while, the carpenter forgot that he'd ever been married. He sold his house and moved to the Bahamas. Finally, when she emerged, the house was different. There was unfamiliar furniture in the living room. Her boxes were gone, long since used to pack up the carpenter's tools and books and clothes. The Russian woman who had bought the house stood in the kitchen, cooking borscht. Uncanny, the Russian woman thought. It felt as though someone was watching her. Perhaps this large empty house was haunted. Thanks.